Welcome to the 3Haunted podcast, where we bring you all things horror, supernatural, folklore, mythology, and all things that go bump in the night.
What's up, everybody? This is your co-host, Ashley Lunar Goddess, Gorilla Girl filmmaker and horror-loving cinephile. I'm just your average podcast-producing badass.
And I'm John Thomas. If it's haunted, cursed, or just plain weird, I'm into it. From paranormal encounters to horror movie deep dives, urban legends, cryptids, count me in.
I'm BJ Sewura, an aspiring paranormal musician who plays live for the dead because the living just doesn't want to hear me.
What's up, ghouls, gals, and spooky pals? Most people spend their lives trying to outrun death. Our guest spends his days listening to what it has to say. Tonight, we're pulling back the sheet and stepping into the morgue to uncover the unknown. On this episode, we're joined by forensic pathologist and horror filmmaker Dr. Leon Kelly. Join us as we unzip the body bag, because the truth has a way of refusing to stay buried. Welcome to the show, Leon.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So glad to have you on. You are the first forensic pathologist we've ever spoken to, so this is pretty exciting. And you are also a horror filmmaker.
That's right. Yeah. We joke that there's more forensic pathologists on TV than there are in real life. So there aren't a lot of us out there, despite being a very popular trope for horror films and serial killer movies and CSI shows and everything in between.
So you kind of have the field cornered, right?
We do. Yeah, we got it. So I'm a forensic pathologist, as you said, which means I'm a doctor whose job it is to do autopsies on folks and figure out the how and the why people die. And then part of that, what led me, I think, to that, and then also what's helped me kind of deal with that world is my love of horror films. And so I run a horror film festival called 6 Feet Under Horror Film Fest with a partner of mine who's also a forensic pathologist, Dr. Dan Lingenfelter. And so we've been friends a long time and kind of bonded over scary movies and started getting our friends together to watch them. And then, who better to host a horror film festival than two forensic pathologists?
What came first, horror or the forensic pathology?
Certainly the horror came first, right? That was very young, sleepovers with friends, getting a hold of VHS tapes that we probably shouldn't have had at that age and daring each other to watch them, and movie marathons through the night. And, that's how I found my friend group as a kid. You know your tribe because they love the same kind of movies that you like. And then it kind of grew from that. And I became a forensic pathologist. I didn't plan on doing that. I went to medical school, thought I'd be a surgeon, and kind of you just figure out who you are and what you like and what you don't like. And, life happens and you figure out, what you're skilled at and the things that give you meaning and purpose. And so ultimately I made my way to forensic pathology, and I never really made the connection that, my love of horror films probably had something to do with how I ended up being a medical examiner. But I was actually being interviewed by a reporter, 6-7 years ago, and about the film festival. And the reporter just said, "Hey, do you think maybe the reason you're a forensic pathologist is because you loved horror films as a kid?" And it was like, man, you maybe 5 minutes ago, you knew more about myself than I did. I never thought about it that way, but clearly that's so obvious that yeah, that's it. You end up in life for a million different reasons and decisions you made along the way and experiences that you had, but certainly that a part of that interest in sort of the macabre and the dark and the kind of a scarier side of humanity and what's out there in the world, undoubtedly that interest played a role in ultimately what led me to my career.
So are there a lot of movies or TV shows that you watch that you see that they're doing your job and they're like, this isn't believable, like some of the jargon that they use, or do you think that they're pretty accurate with what they're saying?
So it's gotten better over the years. I can tell you that much. And for me, it's, my tastes in horror tend to be more towards the supernatural and the paranormal and like that kind of stuff. Because if I watch something that has a lot like a serial killer and they're tracking them and there's, it feels like my job. Like if you were a dentist, you wouldn't go home and watch movies about being a dentist. Like you'd want to see something else. And so, sometimes if I see a film where like I went and saw Evil Dead Burns last night, and it's hard not to just think, after 10 people have been brutally killed, you're like, man, that would be a horrible day at work the next day. Like this is entertaining to everybody else, but I'm going to get anxiety about like, God, it's going to take forever to do this, to process this scene and to do these autopsies. And so, I don't watch a lot of like forensic pathologist focused stuff, but every once in a while, there's something that inevitably is there. There's most of the time I have the suspension of disbelief, right? I can watch an autopsy in a movie and it's ridiculous and I don't even think about it. But when you do see one where they do it really, really well, and even I, who's done 7,000 autopsies, are like, ooh, man, I can't quite tell if that's like, that looks real to me. Like I can't necessarily automatically tell the difference. You're at least impressed, right? You're like, wow, they spent the time and the effort, and they probably had a technical, expert who came in and told them what to do. As far as like the ones that get it right, the ones people will ask me that a lot, like, if I'm going to learn about what it's like to be a forensic pathologist, what movie do I watch? And the one that gets it right as far as like what it feels like, this world that we live in and operate in, and sort of what the impact it has on you, is probably the first season of True Detective. That just like the impact of constantly dealing with the most horrible things imaginable, and what that does to you psychologically and to your family, and how you then relate with each other in the world, and all of that. That's the one I like. The other one that gives you a really good feeling of that kind of brought me through to forensics, when I see it now, I think it captures that feeling really well. Is Seven. I've been to many death scenes, and looked at thousands of pictures of death scenes and videos of people dying, and it's just part of the job that you have to deal with those things. But the psychological impact, that sort of constant sense of foreboding that you feel in that movie of like anything horrible is going to happen, and in many ways you're just trying to kind of hold on. The Brad Pitt character comes into it like, I'm going to change the world, I'm going to fix everything, and his mentor, Morgan Freeman, is like, this place is going to eat you alive. And I remember being in the beginning of my career, being like the Brad Pitt character, be like, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to save the world. I'm going to fight crime. I'm going to be Batman or whatever. And then when you get later on in your career, you're like, man, I just want to get through the day. Like, this is a tough job, and it's important, but you see Morgan Freeman, you're like, man, he was right the whole time. Like, he really knew what he was talking about.
So when you see something like the autopsy of Jane Doe come out, is it something, because that's in the name, that you're just like, too much, probably close to my career, you want to be able to step away from it? Or is it the supernatural aspect of it? Does that kind of override that and draw you in?
No, that's a great movie. And I like it a lot. We actually showed it at one of our film festivals. We did an autopsy themed doubleheader. And so that was one that we picked, and they do a really, really good job with that one. And when that one came out, that was the talk of the morgue. All the techs and all the doctors had seen it, and we talk about the different scenes and how well they did here and they didn't do there, and how cool that would be. And, the premise of doing autopsies in the middle of the night at your, derelict funeral home is probably not the most accurate thing. It's probably not what you do. We have a beautiful morgue that looks like an operating suite with all the lights and everything. But you do appreciate, any career appreciates when somebody highlights kind of what you do, and to take a cool supernatural twist on it is very entertaining. So no, that's a good one. That's one that if we think about a movie that's an autopsy movie, because it takes place in that morgue, right? And so we appreciate you at least giving us a little nod and spending some time talking about what we do.
Does something like that ever kind of unsettle you, where watching that and the supernatural aspects that occurred with that, where it's like just a little on edge when you go into the morgue the next day? Or
Yeah, I've done this for 20 years, and so you don't think about it so much. Like you walk in, you have a job to do. Usually it's a collection of fairly tragic things, and you're trying to help their family, and we don't necessarily save lives as forensic pathologists. Like we don't treat living people anymore, but what we learn in these cases and learn through the autopsies and learn through the investigations, the goal ultimately is to use that information to, bring, answers and closure to family, right? Or, the reason ultimately why we do it is because what we learn could potentially prevent that same terrible thing from happening to somebody else, whether it is a criminal case or an accident or a malfunctioning car or an intersection that, people keep crashing in. Like, ultimately it's to help the living, right? That's why we do what we do. And so you don't often have time to think about, is this spooky or not? The few times it does happen is where I did my fellowship. We had a giant cooler and you could fit 30, 40 bodies in that cooler. And you'd have to go in there, you'd forget something, a tattoo that you can't read your writing. So you'd have to go back in after the autopsy and double check or, write something down that you forgot. And you'd walk in there and the had automatic doors, so they'd shut behind you. And you'd be working on whatever you're working on and writing some stuff down. And suddenly you'd stop and look up and it's just you in there. You're the only living person. And there's like 30 dead bodies surrounding you in body bags, like every horror film. And those are the times you're like, man, like I'm definitely outnumbered. Like if something bad were to happen, this is literally the place that if you were watching me in a horror film, you'd be like, now who would go into a morgue with 30 dead bodies by themselves that the door shuts behind them? But that's sort of the reality of the world in which we live.
I just, every time we have somebody on to talk about horror movies, we do ask them, what's your favorite scary movie? So what's your favorite scary movie?
So my favorite scary movie is The Exorcist. I grew up raised Catholic, and I remember as a kid, I don't know how old I was, but probably in the single digits, 8 or 9, getting a hold of a VHS, and parents were out for the night and inviting some friends over for a sleepover and trying to watch it, and all of us just getting so scared we couldn't do it. And I remember arguing about who was going to sleep, in your sleeping bags on the floor, and who was going to sleep closest to the door, right? Because you wanted to be the one all the way in the room. And I remember it took me 3 nights to get through the whole thing, to watch it all. And it changed my life. Like that feeling that you get of watching a really scary movie with your friends and laughing and screaming, and it was like a drug. It was like an addiction immediately, and you felt like on the other side that you had really bonded and experienced something together. And so that's always that's one of the first ones when my kids were of age that I showed to them. Like, you want to see a really scary movie? Like no goosebumps, no horror starter kit stuff, but like let's take it to the next level, guys.
Go straight to the trauma bonding.
Right.
Straight to the core. And so that's because that isn't part of my daily life. That isn't part of like my experience. To me, that's a more enjoyable, like, kind of a way to spend time and really go on a journey and see a world that isn't the one that I have to deal with all the time.
I get that. That one scared the crap out of me forever. I was still in my 20s and even close to my 30s. And then I finally showed my daughter when she was like 11, probably the wrong age to do it. But she just laughed at me. She's like, "Why do you think this is scary?" I'm like, "Shush, I don't want to hear it." Like, seriously.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it depends on when you see it and the context in which you see it. I mean, it's a banger today. Like, there is not a frame in that movie that I would change, that you could do better. But yeah, there are certainly a generation or so that if they're not at the right moment, they're like, "What is this?" But I've had people say, first time I saw it, I didn't get it, and then I watched it years later, or watched it after I had kids, or watched it at another time, and suddenly, like, that was the most horrifying thing that I've ever experienced. And I think because growing up Catholic and you felt like, I don't think this is real, but it could be real. Like, they're telling me on Sundays that this is real. And so they're telling me and I'm seeing it, and it looks really real. Maybe there is. Maybe there's all, and that's what a good horror film needs to do. Like, it only needs to give you that like 0.1% of, this is ridiculous, but if it did happen, this would be really, really scary.
I know someone I know says, "I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious." So if you can just get that slight part, that little percent, then you got them.
Open the door and suddenly you're like, "Oh no."
I think it's about setting up the scene too, because for our kids' generation, certain things they may be desensitized to because movies have gotten so angrier and visceral when it comes to the horror world. So for those ones that are desensitized, I'm like, watch it alone. In the dark at night, turn up the sound and watch it alone. Because when you watch The Exorcist socially, it's a little easier to laugh it off. But when you're by yourself,
yeah. And my favorite horror films tend to be those that kind of, like, if you watch a movie like Hostel or whatever, Saw, and you're like, you end up in like a grungy, like, basement in the middle of nowhere, you're not really shocked that scary, horrible things are going to happen to you. Like our brains have been taught that like that scenario, bad stuff happens. To me, the best horror films are when they take the things that we feel are safe and the things that we're comfortable in, and then they take those and turn those into terrifying situations, right? Your paranormal activities, your your poltergeist, like a nice suburban home that like we've all been in and like we've lived most of our lives. And then when you take that, camping trip with friends, that's like, we're going through the woods. And they take the things that you kind of hold dear and there are your safe, happy places. And they go, no. We're going to take that thing and we're going to turn it upside down. And then we're going to make you never think about that same thing again. Like, you like a swim on the beach? Not anymore. We've got Jaws.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
I think that's why Evil Dead Rise got to me so much, because it took place in the
Yes.
apartment building. And it's like the
Yep.
mom's not safe. The kids aren't
Yep.
safe. Like that one got to me.
It gets you. Your mom, like who? Like that's the one place that's supposed to be everyone's safe place, and they turn that into the center of evil. Like that's brilliant.
Yeah, that was fantastic and terrifying.
Yep.
Is there a place that you haven't seen yet that's one of those safe spots that you'd be like, that would be a great setting for something spooky, like something that would be like, oof.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if I did, we would be working on a movie about that right now, right? Because that's the $1 million question. Like that's obsession. That's how you do it. Like your first crush. Let's turn that into the most terrifying thing ever.
Oh God.
Your safe, benign, friend zone, boyfriend. Let's turn that person into the person that snaps the wish and turns you into a love zombie, right? And so I think that's anybody who's trying to make something new and from a different perspective, that's what they're looking for. Like, how do I turn something that's mundane into a terrifying place?
We've talked about that, like what would happen if a zombie apocalypse popped off at like a convention, like a Comic-Con, because at first you wouldn't even know it was happening,
You wouldn't
right? Because
know.
people are
Like,
cosplayed as
killer makeup,
zombies. Yeah. And then
Good
by the
job.
time you realize it, it's like, oh my gosh, hilarious,
Yeah.
because you have anime characters now zombified coming at you,
Mhm.
but also
Yep.
unsettling. Now,
Yeah.
Leon, you are a filmmaker and you're in horror film. What was that jump off point from forensic pathologist? I know it's okay. My friend and I were now going to create the horror film festival, but then what was the next step of now I want to create it?
So we started, probably 2009 initially as just hosting friends at our homes. Me and Dan, we'd alternate and have some friends over, and we'd curate, 4 or 5 movies to watch through the night with cocktails and themed meals and everything. And we did that for a decade. And it got so popular that I was having friends that were like pissed. They'd be like, dude, I've known you for 4 years. How do I get an invite to this party that everyone's talking about? But we had couches, and then I had a basement with a dedicated home theater, so I could limit it to 12 people. So that's all that could get in there. And so when right before the pandemic, he and I started talking about could we do this on a bigger scale, right? And so I had started actually using it as a way to raise money for my kids' school as an auction. That way, I'm like, I'll put it in the auction. You buy a ticket, raise money for the school. Then it's not my problem. You can't be mad at me because you didn't buy a ticket. And so I started doing that. And then we got right to the point where we're about to start the Horror Fest, and then the pandemic came. And one of my jobs during that time as a deputy medical director at the public health department was helping kind of unique businesses navigate kind of a ever-evolving rules. And there was a movie theater that was opening up in Colorado Springs. And so they reached out and said, hey, can you help us get open and figure out what we need to do? And so in those conversations, I got to know the owner. And I said, well, as we're coming out of this, there's no movies. Would you like to host a film festival for us? And he said, yeah, for sure. So we followed the rules and did it. And it was a huge success. It was cool to show these films at a commercial theater. And so as we were kind of growing that beginning in 2021, we started to meet filmmakers. We started to open up like a short panel. And so filmmakers would send their shorts in. We then got to know some feature filmmakers, and then we'd show and do like a retrospective, let them pick a couple of their films or a film that they made and then a film that inspired them, and we'd show them as a double feature. And so we got kind of involved in the local filmmaking community. And then we started commissioning filmmakers to make short films that were essentially glorified kind of promos for our film festival. And so it was really, we got to finally work on sort of the creative side of this. And then as we progressed, we got involved as executive producers on a couple other projects, but these were projects that were like largely down the road. There was already script they were shooting. They were just looking for additional funding or partner to help promote it. And so about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we, because of all these connections in the local community, a filmmaker reached out to me named Evan Alderson, who is our writer and director. And he was from California, and he worked at Paramount, and he had moved here for family reasons. They had had a kid and got involved in the local filmmaking community and was kind of shocked to discover how many really talented people there were here. Right. And so he runs a visual effects company, and he runs it here, but he travels back and forth to Los Angeles. And he said, I really think that there are enough people here that we could shoot a feature film and really showcase kind of what our local talent is. Because there's not a lot of narrative full features projects along the Front Range. There's some, but not a lot. A lot of it's commercial work. And so he was asking around, and they said, hey, you got to meet this guy, Leon. He runs a film festival with horror films, and he's very involved. And so we met, immediately bonded, immediately became friends, shared kind of same vision of what this community, Colorado Springs, Front Range could be, and began to work on the film. And we went through several kind of scripts, thoughts and ideas and pitches to us, and then finally found a writer who had what we thought was a really good idea for a film, which was Devil in the Trunk. And we took that kind of very simple core idea of there's this woman who's traveling the desert Southwest, and she claims to have the actual devil trapped in the trunk of her car. And that was kind of it. There were some other parts of the project that we just couldn't do, from brilliant ideas from the original writer, who the story is by, that just budgetarily wasn't going to make sense. And what we wanted to do is really highlight kind of the Eastern Plains and use what we had in Colorado, which was beautiful settings and scenery. Right? We couldn't build giant sets. We didn't have insane asylums. We didn't have prisons we didn't have the budget for any of that kind of stuff. But were mountains and sunsets and beautiful plains and things like that. And so we started to adapt that story with that original writer's help, and then crafted into what became Devil in the Trunk. And then we finished that script. And my job as executive producer is just to kind of help sort of guide it a little bit and shuttle it from here to here and give thoughts and big picture themes. But really, as Evan, it's Evan's words, and it's really his brilliance and vision that brings it to life. And so once we had a script, we started kind of shopping it around and showing it to people, and then we began the process of casting it and hiring the crew and locations and all the things that go into making a real movie. And then we shot it beginning in May. We had to push it back a week because it's Colorado. So, we're like, we're going to shoot this day. It's May. It's the middle of May. And then we have a snowstorm, right? And so you never know what you're going to get here. And so it's been an adventure. But Evan put together an incredible group of actors and crew, and really the best of the best across Colorado, and made a pretty badass movie.
Now that you have been a part of this, with the executive production of it, mm-hmm. has it created this sparking you to do more?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's what I've learned. It is nearly an impossible task to make a movie. Like, you need, on our set, 30, 40 people to do everything exactly right at the exact same moment. And everything from where a cloud is in the sky to, the wind blowing to, somebody who decides to go around the barricade because we've closed off a road to shoot a scene. Like, everything has to work perfect. And you have to do that thousands of times. And for a year and a half leading up to it, like, everything has to go your way. And it feels at times like the universe is doing everything in its power to stop you. And so at the end of every day, if you actually made the shots, it truly feels like a miracle happened. And so while that is very challenging, it's also probably the most team sport thing I've ever seen. Like, that all of these people have to do everything right every single time. And if anybody, one person, no matter what level they are, doesn't pull it off, the whole thing kind of comes crashing down for that take, and you start over. And so it has been an incredible adventure, and we've still got a ways to go. We're 90% of our principal photography is done, but we've got post-production, visual effects, sound, score, all that kind of stuff. So we're still in the midst of it, to answer your question. So do I want to make a movie tomorrow? Absolutely not. right? Let's get this one done, see what we have, and then show it to the world and see how the world receives it. And then we'll talk. But it is a I've done a lot of really hard things in my career, in my life. I deal with the worst of the worst from a job perspective, but there's been very few times where I've been in a situation as challenging as this one, but also incredibly rewarding and creatively just powerful to have these people, like these characters that we've talked about that we basically dreamt up out of nowhere, and to give them lines and to talk about who they are as a people and their backstory, and these cars that they're driving in this setting that the sunset's coming down and this happens, and then you like dream it up, right? And you talk about it and you have it in your head, and then one day you show up to a set and there's 40 cast and crew sitting around, and then that person gets out of that car and starts saying those words. It's like magical. It's like the most powerful thing that you'll ever experience, to like take a dream and an idea and then make it real, and then see it with your own eyes, and then have someone film it and then cut it together, and suddenly there you see it on your screen. Like we premiered the trailer this weekend, and there it was on a massive screen at a movie theater. This idea that we had 2 years ago. It's really crazy. So I'm sure if we can survive this, at the end of the day, it's got to be good, right? To make a movie doesn't mean anything if it's not cool. But the goal ultimately was with this was it was a mission to show what we could do locally for the purposes of hopefully doing it again.
Yeah, we have a lot of like all three of us have some kind of film background, and we all know how hard it is to get that kind of stuff done, and it's stressful. But like you said, like working with so many awesome people and you guys collaborating, you have all different kinds of talents. You bring something to the table. That's the fun part, right? Like shooting days are always very, very difficult. And, once you get it out there, once you get it, you start editing and everything. For me as a filmmaker, I think that's my favorite part, is sitting in the editing room and watching them do their magic and be like, oh my God, this is actually becoming something. Like, I love what you guys did with it, right? Is there an aspect of this journey that was just like, this is my favorite part of it? I want to be present. If I do this again, this is where I want to be, like, mostly.
Yeah, I mean, as the executive producer, you're not doing the sexiest stuff. Like, you're meeting with the attorney, you're creating the operating agreement, my job is basically to figure out how to pay for everything, right? And just make sure Evan has the tools to craft his vision the best that he can, right? And this is an independent, low budget horror film, and so you have to be scrappy. Every penny counts, and the budget is dictating a lot of what you can and you can't do. And so the part I've enjoyed the most is like, how do you then, we're not Christopher Nolan, we're not making the Odyssey here, right? We don't have the ability to create boats that were actually sailing, right? Full-size Trojan horses. And so my favorite part of it is like, how do you use artistry and creativity and just pure talent and desire and problem solving to tell this story the way that you want to tell it, and to make people feel things, right? Not by throwing more money at it, but by taking what little resources you have and just maximizing it with really, really skilled people who care a lot about it. And you're right, it essentially comes down to these people, and everybody's got a different job and everybody's got a different skill set, and they all have to work together. And to see that happen, it's like, it's a little bit like football, where like every person on the field is shaped a little bit different. Some are tall and skinny, some are short and heavy, and some have to do this, some have to do that, and it can be chaos if you don't know what's happening. But then when everybody does their job perfectly, it's one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see, and that's exactly what it's like to be on a set. And the number of times, my favorite was probably at least 2 or 3 times a day when I was on set, we would have a scene and it would go great and everything would go perfect, and they would say cut, and everyone kind of stops, and every time someone would be like, holy shit, we're making a real fucking movie. Like, this is a real movie. And so it was just so great to be able to see these really talented people go like, I always wanted to do this, let's do this, versus like, I'm shooting a bagel commercial, or I'm shooting a Subaru commercial at Garden of the Gods, which that pays the bills, and that's money too, but to be go, no, let's do something different. Let's do something cool. That to me is the best feeling, to be able to see these people like be able to use their craft and their creativity in the setting that they dreamt of using it. I mean, nobody dreams of shooting Subway commercials, right? As a little kid, they dream of making films, and you do what you got to do. We all do to pay the bills, but to play a small part in helping all of these people live out that dream a little bit, just one more step forward in their path is to me the most rewarding thing. I mean, I want to see a cool movie at the end, but we got people good jobs, and they got to you know do some cool stuff that they wanted to do, which to me that's the best part.
Always joke that the producers have to be a little psychotic, and I am absolutely one of those psychos. I love and thrive being a part of managing the chaos and the madness because there's always a pattern. There's always a way to bring it together and make it happen. But to your point, every single role serves a purpose. Every single person on that set is crucial to the functioning because, like you said, if every person does their position right, you make magic happen. So it's pretty fantastic. Have you had any experiences as a forensic pathologist that you've considered this would be a really great story?
Yeah, I do. I mean, almost every day we have something that could be the seed for a great story. We see things that you would never imagine. I mean, the worst thing that most people have ever experienced in their lives, that's my Tuesday morning. And so, there's always moments where you're like, wow, that is crazy. Even for us who've seen it all, like that's crazy. And so, yeah, I certainly have a few collected in the back of my mind over the years that, I hope someday to adapt and turn into something. And it may not ultimately look like exactly that story, but you have these experiences that are just so shocking or so you can't believe that the things lined up for this to happen, right? And so, yeah, a good forensic pathologist has no shortage of spooky stories.
But when you say spooky, are we talking spooky like supernatural or spooky like a very dark side of humanity?
No, it's the dark side of humanity for sure. And sometimes it's karma, how, something ultimately came back to get this person in a way that you never could have predicted. Like it all kind of evens out in the end, but mostly the dark side of humanity and how evil some people can be to themselves or to others. And then sometimes it's just, it feels like you're living in a Final Destination movie. Like 1,000 things had to happen for this person's life to end at this moment, at this place, the way that it did. And so then you just make, man, it was their day to go for sure.
Does that desensitize you to like horror movies in general? Just after you've seen so much of the real world, when you watch a horror movie, does it like not impress you as much because you know how crazy it can actually get?
So the really, really, the torture porn type stuff that some folks really are into because it's shocking and it gets the adrenaline up, like that stuff I don't necessarily enjoy because it is like my job. Like I see that stuff every single day. And so to me, I can see why others appreciate it. And certainly you can work in that kind of subgenre of horror and make some really, really cool stuff. But I don't necessarily like it as much because I am kind of desensitized to it. It's just kind of, yeah, that's a lot of blood and guts. But if you do something clever and you do something I've never seen before, then it'll kind of take me back into like enjoying it and just watching a movie as opposed to just thinking about that kind of stuff, which is like I said, that's why I kind of lean towards the more supernatural, paranormal type things. I mean, we do in these jobs, I wouldn't say desensitized, I would say compartmentalize, right? So I know and understand and feel that what this is terrible and tragic and awful, and that these are people's lives. And so you never lose sight of that. Like I'm like, oh, I don't care. Like the reality is in jobs like these, and whether you're an ER doc or a first responder, or the easy part for most humans, at least for me, is, and for people in these jobs, is to turn it off. Like you can pretty quickly learn to compartmentalize and sort of shut off that part of your brain that feels those emotions and just do the job, right? And just do the work. And I equate it to like if you fixed, at a body shop and somebody brought a crashed car in, you'd be like, okay, I'm going to fix this car. You wouldn't be like, oh, I wonder how the family feels about the car. I wonder if they took good road trips in this car and the memories that they had. Like if you did that every day, you'd be devastated. So the same thing for me. Like I can't think about like this person and their loved ones, and like that's just too emotionally difficult to deal with. And so you shut that part off of your brain and you get to work and you do it. And I love it because it's like every case is a little mystery. Like you walk into a room, there's bodies everywhere, there's blood everywhere, there's cops, it's chaos. And you walk up to a table, and over the course of an hour or a couple hours, you take all of this chaos and you make complete sense of it using your skills and your experience and shut everything else out. And then at the end, you walk up to the cop or you call the family and say, this is exactly what happened. And you tell them. And there's, to me professionally, there's no bigger high than that. Like you feel like you have a superpower. Like you feel like Sherlock Holmes in every movie, right? Except you're doing this like super hyper intense situation. The harder part is when you then have to call that family or meet with them, and you have to turn that part of your brain back on, right? That empathetic, sympathetic, the human side, because you have to, right? You have to for two reasons. One, because you have to relate to this human being and show them comfort and care. Now you're their doctor, right? You're caring for them, the living person. And the second is you got to go home and live a life. Like you got to have, I got kids, I got a wife, I've got friends. If you shut that part of your brain off forever, like you're not a human being anymore. And so you have to, even though it sucks and it hurts and it's hard, you have to then let that down to feel it, because you have to go back to being a human being. Otherwise, life wouldn't be worth living. And so, the horror films are one of the ways that I think I am able to process those experiences in a way that kind of put them in a little box, and you can laugh and joke with your friends, and then you put your popcorn down and you walk out of the theater and you go outside and it's sunny and it's beautiful, and you go, it's like an ability to sort of shed that part of me in a fun way that is safe and productive and enjoyable, that there's not a lot of other ways that I can do that. Now, the reality is like I go to movies with friends, and if you go to someone who's not a forensic pathologist, you go see a horror film. Like I went to a film one time with a guy and a buddy, and in the movie, they cut off a head, and he asked me afterwards, like, is that what it's like? I'm like, no, that's not all. Like that's the way taking off a head's really hard. Like it takes effort. Like you got to know exactly where the bones are, there's ligaments. I'm like, that's not how it works at all. And he's just like looking at me dumbfounded, like, you've taken off heads. I'm like, I've had many heads that we've had to take off for one reason or another, or they're already off and we're doing this or that. So you come to every thing in your life with a slightly different perspective than I think by far most people.
Have you ever come into a case that you had a bit more of a difficult time compartmentalizing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the ones that get you are the ones that you have something with that situation that reminds you of either yourself or your family or your kids or something in your life, right? It's immediately easy for you to connect with this case. If someone is, a drug dealer and, they get in a bad drug deal gone bad and everybody gets shot, like that's sad. It's tragic. It's horrible. Those people have families that love them and they were once little kids and their mothers and their fathers and people care. Like, I get it. Like that's true. But it's easy for your brain to go, well, I'm not a drug dealer and I wouldn't put myself in that situation. Right. And so just natural human instincts make it easy to kind of put that buffer between you and that situation. And then there are other situations where I could see myself in that. I've been in that place. My kids have been in that place. Like, or you see kids who have died who are like, I had a case where 2 kids were killed and they was the exact same age of my kids at the time, 4 and 2. And they were literally wearing the same Costco pajamas, onesies that my kids wear, And so that is like devastating. And so you're just like, I'm going to keep it together. I'm going to keep it together. Like I got to get through this day. And you always remind yourself that like None of this is about you, right? You're a doctor. This is about them. This is about your patient. In my case, my patients are deceased and their families. And so the second you allow yourself to get upset or to cry or to absorb it or internalize what you're seeing or feeling, then you're not doing them what you've promised to do. You're not living up to your end of the bargain. You're making it about you instead of about helping them, And so that's not what I've been hired to do. That's not what I've spent my entire life to train to do. And so my job in that moment is to walk into that room, into that morgue, and do the best job I can, figure out what happened so that we can move forward and whatever that it means it is, and then walk out of that morgue, and then I can deal with it. But in the moment, if I'm going to break down every time I see something sad, well, I'm a freaking medical examiner. Like I'm not going to get a single case done because they're all sad. That's the only way you end up there. And so I think we, as forensic pathologists, take a lot of pride in our ability to manage that. But yeah, I've done 6, 7, 8 autopsies in a day, and just brutal cases, and gone back to my desk and like cried. And I'm like, I'm going to give myself 60 seconds to cry, and then I got to get my shit together because I got work to do, right? And so you just figure out what you need to continue going, and then once you leave the morgue, right, and you go home, your number one top priority at that point is to make sure that you are putting yourself in a place mentally where you can remind yourself. You have to be conscious of it. It's like exercise. That the world's a good place. There are wonderful things about it. I have things that I love that are important. And then you spend as much of that time doing the things that you love. You would think that this is a depressing job. And it is. It can be in the moment. But the reality is also a very life-affirming job, because the cliche is like, oh, nothing's guaranteed. Like every moment's precious. Like everybody knows that you're supposed to say that, but hardly anybody believes it. You take every moment of your life for granted until like you're concerned that you're going to die or something terrible is going to happen. But we see it every day. Like literally no moment is guaranteed. And so it is easy. To me, it allows me to leave the morgue and not so much care about a lot of the things that so many other people are fixated on, that they allow to drive their meaning and their well-being and their mental state. And I'm like, none of that matters. Like literally today I saw this happen. My wife always jokes that when we go to dinner and stuff and with friends and somebody's like, oh my God, I had such a stressful day. My boss, blah, blah, blah. And then my wife Heather's always like, whoa. Like, we're not going to play the my day was the worst day game with Leon, because you will all lose every single time. You do not want to hear what his day was like. And so I just sit there and I nod and go, wow, that must be really tough for you, knowing what I did. Covered in blood and shit and, all day. Like, yeah, that sucks to have to write that form, not write that TPS form.
Wow, that's tough. Man. I mean, but you have to have a good support system, like your coworkers, right? You were telling us earlier that you guys, we'll talk about horror movies and things like that, and I think when you're in it together with a few people, right, that you work with, you guys all can kind of lean on each other, and I'm sure that's what you do sometimes to get through some of that stuff, because otherwise, just doing it alone all the time like that's got to be rough.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that is the best part of the job, is the going through this with other human beings. So I have morgue techs that I've worked with for 16, 17 years that are some of my best friends, and we have seen everything together and been through mass shootings and the most horrible situations you can imagine. But it also at the same time is a really fun job. Like there's a reason why they make movies and hundreds of TV shows about it. And then there's not one about being a dentist or whatever. Like that's because this is a great job. And to be able to go through that with people that you care about and that share that same worldview, that same sense of humor, and that you can just look at each other and shake your head and be like, dang, that is crazy. But then also have this just profound sense that like you're doing something important, right? And meaningful and timeless. And what like you're living a life that is what movies are made of. Like you're doing that every single day. And to do that with really cool people is great. And not only the people in the morgue, but I've got to work with the coolest cops and homicide detectives and public health officials and prosecutors and defense attorneys and the FBI and NTSB who does like transportation and like all of these people who are the greatest minds in whatever crazy field that they're in, to then like bring these people together and then have people like work to figure these things out is just, it's the coolest feeling. It's like you can never, like, the world, life is unpredictable. I mean, you never know what's going to roll through the door, but you're surrounded by the smartest and the coolest and the most dedicated human beings. And so you have absolute confidence you're going to figure it out. I have a big painting on my wall in my office that says, we always figure it out, because like we do, like you just keep working until you figure it out. And there's nothing cooler than that, than being with other group of humans and working through something challenging. It's like Apollo 13 every day. It's like, it's a terrible situation. We got a dryer hose, some duct tape, and some bubble gum. Like, let's figure out how to get them home. And that's what we do.
You're the MacGyver of dead bodies. And also,
Yeah.
You have dentists clutching their
I know.
pearls right now.
I use dentists as an example because I wanted to be a dentist when I was in undergrad. And I spent several summers at the dental school doing research. And two things happened there. One, I met my future wife, who's my current wife, so I'll never regret it. Second, I learned that dentistry was the most mind-numbingly boring profession that existed. And so I realized I didn't want to be a dentist. I have a great dentist. I love my dentist. I hope he's not listening to this. Because it could be a pretty
I hope he is.
Visit my next time I'm in. But I love you, dentist. You're amazing, but you're not. You don't live the most cinematic, exciting life.
They inflict torture onto people. They are the ultimate masochists.
They're important though. They're
sadists. They're the ultimate sadists. There we go. So I know you grew up Catholic and you gravitated towards the supernatural films. With that said, being in the field that you are, how has forensic pathology impacted your level of belief when it comes to the supernatural?
So, growing up Catholic, my first love was, probably baseball. And then my second love was probably science, right? And so at a fairly young age, junior high, I started to ask a lot of questions like irritating kids sometimes do. And, we'd leave church and I'd be like, yeah, but what about the dinosaurs? And so my parents like, don't worry about the dinosaurs, stop asking questions, kid. And I got to high school and, I got to be 17, 18 years old. And like most 18-year-old males, I thought I was the smartest person in the history of the world. And I had it all figured out, right? And so, I was sort of a devout kind of militant atheist. Like, this is all made up. Science is the only thing that's real. And kind of rejected it, just roundly and resoundly, right? All of it. And then you kind of grow up and then you see, things happen and people die and there's tragedies in your life and there's loss and, people go through tough times and you see the value of belief and what it can do for folks and why it's necessary in their lives. And then you suddenly realize, man, maybe I don't know everything. And then I became, as an adult, a Unitarian, which is, it's more of a moral code that you live by, right? As opposed to a dogmatic. If you believe this thing happened, this magical thing happened, that makes you, a member of this religion. This is more, well, if you behave in this way and you honor these values, then that's what we believe in, and that's how we treat each other. And so that spoke much more strongly to me as someone who, it's not what you believe, it's how you act and what you do in this world and the impact that you make, and how you treat other people. And so that's kind of how I proceeded. And then I became a forensic pathologist. And then you deal with death every single day. And so I'm in a place in my life where I understand I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to pretend to. And life is hard. And if having this connection to whatever it is your version of God or the universe or nature or whatever it is helps you survive and live and thrive and care and make a difference, then I'm all for it, right? And that's in practice in what we do, because I'm taking care of everybody, no matter who they are. I mean, I've autopsied and treated people who've murdered their entire families with as much respect as I did the victims, right? And because that's what your job is, to treat every human being with respect and care for them, regardless of who they are. None of us are without mistakes and really, obviously varying degrees of mistakes, but I'm not here to judge and say you're right or you're wrong. And so what I have experienced is that people have all kinds of beliefs, and those beliefs help get them through the most tragic times of their life, which is someone that they love deeply has died suddenly and unexpectedly and tragically, right? And so I've literally had people who their religion is in 3 days, the body's going to rise and walk out of the morgue, and they want to bring donuts for that person when they wake up and they're hungry. And I say, okay, let's do it. And we'll sit those donuts there for 3 days and they'll get stale. And who am I to say? Right? I'm going to do whatever it is I need to do to help you in this time. Now, if they get up in 3 days, we probably got bigger problems. We got some issues, but whatever. I had an elderly woman call me one time, and I had autopsied her husband, and she told me that she didn't believe he was dead, and that he's a deep sleeper, and she wanted me to double check because she just needed to know that he was really dead. And I had already autopsied him. Like, his organs were in a bag, and so if he wasn't dead before, he sure was now. And I didn't tell her that, but she's like, can you please check? And I said, yeah, I'll check. And, I had the stethoscope. Forensic pathologists don't really need stethoscopes because nobody's got a heartbeat. But I'm a real doctor, so I have it mostly because employees had their kids had school physicals or whatever. So I'd bust it out every once in a while just to do a sports physical and sign the paperwork. And so I took my stethoscope, I went into the cooler, I opened the body bag, I put that stethoscope, on his chest in my ears with a full-on empty chest, and I listened for 30 seconds, didn't hear a heartbeat because his heart was in a bag. And I went back and I got her on the phone. I said, yep, I've double checked and there's no heartbeat. And she was so sweet. She's like, that's all I wanted. I just needed to know that. And I said, you're very welcome. Happy to help. Sorry that I had to be the one to tell you. And so, you learn that nobody knows a lot. There's a lot we don't know. And I'm always open to someone else's perspective.
I just love your ethics in that moment. You could have just put her on hold and then picked the phone back up, but you actually went to listen for the heart. So that speaks volumes to your character.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there was a 1% of me that was a little curious.
And what would you have done had you heard a heartbeat?
I would have got my laptop out and immediately started writing my script to the next great morgue horror story.
I would just say, be careful of those doors you're knocking on.
Well, with that, have you had any paranormal experiences? I feel like in your field, a lot of, I don't know, people, when there's a lot of tragedy involved, there are a lot of echoes or, people die too early or, things like that. And maybe there's some kind of something from the other side being there with you in those first moments. Have you had experiences like that?
So this is something that I wish would happen to me. I truly wish that I would have those kinds of experiences. And you'd think the guy who works at the morgue and that's where every horrible tragic death happens, would have some sort of good, spooky in the middle of the night, story. But I honestly don't. It's a pretty chill, relaxed place. I mean, my favorite kind of I guess it is sort of supernatural-ish story is I had a case where an elderly woman, in her late 80s, was cared for by her grandson, who was an adult. And nobody had heard from her for a while, so they did a welfare check, and they found her decomposing in her house. And the whole house was ransacked, and there were IV drug needles everywhere. And so they were basically, the grandson was using it as a drug house. And she had died many, many, many months before and was almost completely skeletonized. And in the house, when somebody dies and they start to decompose, flies obviously land on the body and they lay eggs, and those eggs hatch and maggots come out and maggots consume the body, and then maggots grow up and they turn into flies, and the whole process kind of starts over. And that's what in part consumes the body during decomposition to get to a skeleton. And the grandson was nowhere to be found. And so I brought her in, I autopsied her, We were able to identify her, but she was basically a skeleton. So there wasn't really much for me to determine as far as the cause of death. Most likely she died, and he didn't tell anybody because he wanted to keep using the house as sort of a party house. And, the checks were coming in because she was elderly, and you've got Social Security and you've got pension checks and you've got all that stuff. So he was living on, the high on the hog there a little bit, and he had disappeared. And so we didn't know where he was, but eventually a couple of months later, he was found. The homicide detective called me and said, "Hey, we found the grandson on that skeleton case that you had." And we knew someone was living there because she had to have been dead at least probably 6 to 9 months. And there was a milk carton in the fridge that was dated just less than 30 days before we found her. So someone had been living there this whole time. And so we assumed it was the grandson. And so when they found the grandson, I said, "Well, what happened to him? Where is he? What does he say happened?" And he said, "Well, he's in the ICU in the hospital, and he can't speak. He's on a ventilator, and the doctors don't know if he's going to pull through." And I said, he wasn't that old. He's probably in his 20s. And I said, "Well, what happened to him?" Thinking it was probably a drug overdose or something. And they said, "Well, he got really sick, and the doctors, they said they've never seen anything like this. And they said he's got this disease called Morgellons disease." And I said, "Oh," I kind of started laughing, and I said, "Do you know what that is?" And the cop's like, "I don't know what that is." I said, "Well, it's not really a disease. It's like a psychological manifestation where individuals, usually IV drug users or people with psychosis, believe that there are fibers or bugs in their skin." And William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist, made a movie with Ashley Judd called Book, where they were holed up in a motel, and they thought the government was going to get him, and they put the aluminum foil all over the windows, and that the main character kept believing that that they were tracking him with things embedded in his skin. And so they believe this, and so then they pick at it, which then causes a scab and an infection, which then kind of reinforces the belief that there's something under their skin. And the detective said, "Yeah, out of all of these wounds, the doctors say they just keep hatching all of these maggots, and they don't know what to do. And the maggots are basically eating him alive in the ICU." And I said, "Oh my God, that's incredible." And he's like, "Why?" I go, "Well, do you know why he's got those maggots?" And he's like, "No." I go, "It's because he was living in the house with his deceased grandmother. He's letting her decompose in front of him. All of those flies are flying around in the home that are coming from the maggots that are consuming her. They're landing on him. They're laying these eggs. And now they're hatching, and they're coming back. And so if he dies, it's essentially the grandmother coming back from the grave to inflict her revenge in the same way that he basically neglected her and let her basically rot there." And I'm like, that's the most Edgar Allan Poe shit I've ever heard. That is true karma coming back to get this guy.
Awesome Tales from the Crypt there.
I know. And I graduated, and I never found out if he lived or died, but grandma certainly got her revenge. And so take care of your old people and love them, because you never know what could come back from the grave to get revenge on you.
Maggots, you're birthing maggots. And actually, the most Edgar Allan Poe stuff was if you heard the heartbeat.
Yes, that's right. That would have been even better.
The telltale heart. Oh,
Heartbeat in
man.
the bag.
Oh, that would be interesting. And you mentioned earlier, sometimes you're doing 7 in a day. I mean, that's got to be extremely draining to have to keep compartmentalizing, if nothing else, tasking to keep staying in that compartmentalized state. Is there something specific you have to do before you go into these and when you're leaving, just to make sure that you're okay? I know you have the affirmations on your way home, but what about in between these different autopsy cases?
Well, I think the day kind of starts the evening before. So we get a text message every evening that tells us what the cases are for the next day. And it's just a list of 33-year-old male, probable drugs, 25-year-old MVA, multiple gunshot wound homicide. And so you kind of know the night before what you're dealing with. And so you have the time to kind of mentally prepare for it. And if you've got a really rough day or a brutal day, you kind of have to get yourself psyched up a little bit more. I play music in the morgue, and so that helps me kind of put my mind in the right headspace. And sometimes, depending on the circumstances of the case and what we're dealing with, I'll kind of theme the music for what we're doing. If I have someone who I know, or I know someone who knows them who's passed away, I'll literally text them and be like, "Hey, what kind of music did they like?" And that's what I'll play in the morgue, because I think that's kind of cool. But if I've got a pretty particularly gruesome day, I often like to play actually. I'll play like really saccharine 50s like sock hop movie songs, like Lollipop, Lollipop. Because there's something to me that's just like so entertaining about this like super sweet 50s rock music, like combined with like the Saw, like opening heads and blood everywhere. And it makes me kind of chuckle and happy that like these two things are happening at the same time. And so that is honestly the biggest. Like I literally couldn't make it through a day if I didn't have music. Unfortunately, every office I've ever worked at, including the one I ran, the medical examiner gets to be the DJ, so I get to pick it. I don't like death metal. Like that's too much for me to be listening to. I'm like it's already sad enough, and like heavy enough. So I kind of go the full other extreme. Like if most artists knew. Taylor Swift knew what some of her songs were being played to. She would probably lose her mind because I like to go the other direction. So that's one thing I do, and then we do have a good time, and we joke and we talk about movies and we talk about what we've seen and we talk about our weekends and we talk about all the things that you would normally talk about with your friends at work in any other setting. We're just doing it like in the most intense. Blood spattered room in the city. But then at the end of the day, we go to lunch, we hang out, we do all the normal things that people would do. I do have to, when I leave, when my kids they're teenagers now, 17 and 15. And so they certainly know what dad does and they've known for a long time. When they were really little, we had what does your dad do? And we'd say, dad helps cops and firemen figure out what happened to people. And then as they get a little older, then some other kid's parent at school who knows who I am and what I do will then tell their kid. And then, of course, their kid will then tell my kid that everyone at school was talking about the fact that you cut up dead bodies. And so we have to eventually have that conversation. And, my wife, who doesn't work in healthcare at all, there's not a lot of, how was your day? And the answer is always, it was fine. And that's most days, that's about as much detail as I want to give. And then once the kids are out of the room, then she can be like, well, I saw this on the news. How'd that turn out? I'm like, well, this is what happened. And then now that they're teenagers, my 17-year-old daughter loves true crime more than anything. And so on nights when it's just me and her, that's what she wants to do with dad is let's watch a Netflix true crime documentary. Peppers me with questions.
That's
out.
I think with the music that you play, like you were saying, the oldies and stuff, I think that would make for like a good soundtrack for a horror movie with something kind of like that. I think it would be great. It would pull me in more.
It just reminds me of Jeepers Creepers.
Yeah.
Just screaming in the background, and then he's just playing Jeepers Creepers.
Or Dexter, there's a scene where he's sawing up a guy to make me lose control by Eric Carvin.
Yep.
See, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that thinks that's cool.
One thing I wanted to ask you that you obviously are in the Colorado Springs, and we're all from Colorado and everything. And I forgot that you guys have a connection with the Colorado Festival of Horror, right?
That's right.
So you guys partner with them to do some screenings and all that. Are you going to be showing the trailer at COFO this year at all?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. We haven't talked that through. COFO's been great supporters of us. Dan and I, as two forensic pathologists for the past, I think 3 years, we've given presentations at COFO of real life versus what you see in the movies. So like a forensic pathologist's perspective on horror films, and that's been a big hit each year. And so we're planning on putting together another presentation for that. Last year we did Final Destination scenes, and then we compared those to kind of a slightly censored but very realistic view of what that looks like in real life. And so we've got a lot of filmmakers and special effects and makeup people and fans of horror and people who work in those kinds of industries. So then for them to be able to see kind of like what our real world looks like helps them create better films and more realistic stuff and tell better stories. And so that's always a fun group. I've given talks to horror and mystery writers of America for many years, or of Colorado for many years. And it's always fun to kind of dip a toe into the creative side of things and give them a peek into what the real world looks like. So yeah, Kofo they've been wonderful partners with us for many years.
That's awesome. I can't wait. If you guys are going to do that again, I have to be part of it.
Being that you are in the field that you are in, is there anything that you are afraid of? Because I imagine death is probably not one of them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not in a traditional sense. I mean, I think that it does make you make different choices in your life, right? Everything that I do is sort of like a risk reward calculation in my head of what's the likelihood of that killing me versus what joy do I get out of it. And so I don't do a lot of super dangerous things. Like there's literally not enough money in the world to get me on a motorcycle. Like I just wouldn't do it. It makes no sense to me. And people love motorcycles and they get a lot of joy out of it. And I'm not saying let's ban motorcycles at all. I'm just saying for me, I've seen all summer as this motorcycle after motorcycle death. But at the same time, like I love to go scuba diving. I love to night dive, and that would be the most terrifying thing for most people to even think about. And there's a risk more dangerous than than standing on the street corner. But to me, I get meaning and purpose out of that, right? And so I'm never gonna deprive someone of that. But certainly for me, there are things that I just don't do. Like there's no amount of money that would be worth it. There's no amount of joy that's going to come from it. I've seen the downside consequences of that. I mean, I don't drink any alcohol. I don't use any drugs. I don't it teaches you real quick, like here are the things to avoid if you want to live to better your odds. Put it that way, because nothing is guaranteed. But there's just values that I have, that things that I put value on, that there's going to be a trade off, and so I put my weight over here, my priorities over here versus over there. But I also, I love good barbecue. I love, there are certain things you can't eat anymore because they do remind you of the job, but you would be shocked. I mean, a really, a fire case, residential fire, death, it smells like barbecue. And so, you do that case at 8:00, and by like 9:45, you're like, God, I'm starving. Like, when is lunch coming? And like, why am I so hungry today? And you're like, oh no.
Oh no.
Oh
no.
Goodness.
And you're covered in blood, and you're covered in maggots, and you're covered in all this stuff. And so, one of the jokes that we always have is like, inevitably at some point you're going to cut something, and you're going to be doing something, and something's going to splash in your face, or splash in your mouth, or I've had stuff splash. It goes around the mask, or you're doing something, you don't even have your mask on yet, and a little piece of tissue or blood flies in your mouth, and you're like, the saying is like, does that make you a cannibal if you've done it? And you're like, we've always landed on, if human flesh gets in your mouth, that doesn't make you a cannibal, but if you enjoyed it, then it does. Like,
well, did you swallow it?
Well, you kind of like, not really, like you don't want to. I did have
so many questions now, Leon. So many questions.
The scariest thing that you asked me if anything scary. The scariest thing that ever happened to me in the morgue was when the first 28 Days Later movie came out.
Yes.
Right. I went and saw it with a buddy the night before, and it was so disturbing. Like, that was the first time we all saw Fast Zombies, right? And if you recall in the scene there, it's towards the end, it's near the third act, where they're at that it's like a road barricade, but there's like big fencing around it, and it's right before the military comes, and one of the main characters is there, and there's zombies everywhere, and then he hears a bird, and he looks up, and there's a crow, and the crow is chewing on the zombie flesh, and the drop of blood falls from the flesh and lands right in his eye, and he immediately realizes what's about to happen, and then within 10 seconds, right, he turns into the rage virus zombie, right? And so we saw this film, we're both like devastated by it, brilliant, had never seen anything like it, go home, couldn't sleep all night. He texted me in the morning. He's like, dude, I'm so sick. Like, I've got something terrible. Like, I don't know if it was the movie. Like, I don't know what it is. And so I'm like kind of laughing at him, like, oh no, you got the rage virus. And so I go to work, and I'm working on a case, and I was a resident at the time, and so I was doing surgicals, and I had a placenta that the woman had given birth, and I'm examining the placenta, and I'm cutting the placenta up and weighing it, and measuring it, and doing all the exam. And we have to take the tissue and we put them in these they're like little plastic baskets. They're called cassettes, and they take the cassettes, and that's how they make the microscopic slides for us. But they kind of snap into place. And so I take this little chunk of placenta that I've cut, and I put it down on the table, and I've got glasses on, and I go and to click it shut, because it's got like a little trap door that shuts on top of it. And I go to click it, and I click it, and a piece of, like a little drop of blood shoots straight up, right into my freaking eye.
Oh no.
Right into my eye. And I immediately in that eye saw all like blood red.
Oh.
And I freaked out. Like
Yes.
ran to the eye wash station, yanked the thing off, turned it on full power. I'm like washing out my eyes. And I'm thinking, I got 10 seconds until I turn into the rape zone.
This is what you get for teasing your friend about having
This is exactly right. That's my karma. That's my maggots eating my flesh, right? That was him getting back at me for making fun of him for being sick after 28 days later.
Take some placenta in the eye.
That was the scariest I'd ever been. I cut myself one other time really, really badly in the morgue. Almost cut off the tip of my finger working on like a fibroid uterus, and blood went everywhere. And I was there by myself on a weekend, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to bleed to death in this morgue and they're going to find me. So those are my two terrifying things. Nothing supernatural, but nonetheless terrifying.
Hey, supernatural doesn't have to be the only thing that's terrifying. Yeah. I would freak out if I got blood in my eyeball too.
Right in your eye.
Gosh, Leon, this has been fantastic. I know we're starting to go over the time we scheduled you for, and I want to respect your time. But for those that want to stay up to date with the festival as well as your film, where can they find more information?
So our festival is called 6 Feet Under Horror Film Fest. You can find us on the internet, on Instagram, on Facebook. We run a show about every 3 months. We're like a quarterly film festival, so we run pretty much all year round. And so if you go to the website, look it up, you'll see what our next show is and get tickets. And we present at Roadhouse Cinemas, which is kind of like an Alamo Drafthouse, kind of a dine-in movie theater. And so we've got a big October show coming up, and then we do a big Christmas show every year where Krampus comes, and he has a big throne, and you can go sit on his lap and get your picture taken like a mall Santa. And then we show Christmas-themed horror and give away Krampus-themed prizes. And so that's one of our most popular shows of the year. Get your tickets early because like this show we sold out about 2.5 weeks before the actual show started. So that's where you can find us there. And for Devil in the Trunk, entirely shot in Colorado with almost entirely Colorado cast and crew. We've got a little bit of filming left to do and then post-production. We are in the midst of, and when this comes out, we will still be in the middle of our crowdfunding campaign through Seed and Spark, which is kind of like Kickstarter, but for independent films. So you can go to Seed and Spark or follow us on Instagram or Facebook or anywhere else and get the link, or go to Seed and Spark and just put it in the search, Devil in the Trunk, and support the film. We've got really, really cool incentives, including, at certain levels, I'll literally come to your house. You can throw a dinner party, and I will amuse you and your friends for an hour or so, showing some of my favorite cases of my career. And so that's all. I've done that one for many fundraisers for Humane Society and schools and historical societies and stuff. So that's always a huge one, to have an actual forensic pathologist come and tell you the tales of the macabre. But we've got tickets to the premiere. We've got all kinds of cool stuff for incentives and things on there for you. So go to Seed and Spark, check it out, support the film, and then just follow along. And we hope to have a cut sometime in the fall and send it to festivals and see how it goes. And, maybe do a short kind of theatrical run here across the Front Range for cast, crew, family, and friends, and anybody who wants to go see it. So just follow along. Who knows where the future takes the film, but that's where we are now.
Gosh, thank you so much. I mean, this has been fantastic. And I appreciate you coming on to share all of this with us. Yeah. All right. BJ, John Thomas, you guys have any final thoughts, questions before we wrap this awesome episode up?
Just thank you for coming on, like short notice and everything. And like, you've been an amazing guest. This was awesome. I'm surprised I haven't met you before this with all the COFO and just being into the horror scene and everything. And I'm glad I met somebody new and somebody as awesome as you, because you have such an interesting life that I can't imagine, like, it takes a very special kind of person to be able to do what you do and smile and enjoy life, and not let it, like you said, to compartmentalize everything and still still be able to go watch horror and have a good time. Like, that's awesome. I think that's really cool.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I will definitely connect. I'll be at Kofo probably most of the weekend with my 15-year-old son who loves to cosplay. He'll probably be dressed as Five Nights at Freddy's character, so you'll see him, I'm sure.
That's awesome.
I just, again, thank you very much. It's been a very entertaining and very informative episode for sure. Just hearing your stories and connecting with somebody else who loves horror as much as we do. So it's great. So thank you.
You bet. Yeah, absolutely. It's great meeting you guys. It's fun.
I want to know what horror you're into now. That's my final question. Because I know we know The Exorcist was your oldie goodie, but what's your current?
Oh my gosh. I mean, this has been, I feel like we're living in peak indie horror, like, ages, right? And, Obsession was amazing. Backrooms was amazing. Like I said, I saw Evil Dead Burns a couple nights ago. Got the Odyssey coming up pretty soon, because I don't just love horror films. I love all cinema. Like, I love everything. It all. I watched Devil Wears Prada 2 a couple nights ago and had a great time. I'll see
That
it.
was a good one. I liked it.
It was funny. I'm not gonna,
it was great.
There's no shame. So we've got some really good stuff kind of coming this year. Like, I love horror that makes me think, that gives me a different perspective, right? That takes, maybe takes a couple different genres and kind of mashes them together to give us a kind of a fresh perspective. I'm always down for a good slasher, but man, if you can, Weapons, any Jordan Peele movie, like, there's so many great. We're living in a period where, the best directors and creators and brilliant people that we have, from Zach Cregger to Robert Eggers, like, all of the people that I would want to sit down and, like, hang out with, they're all making horror films, right? They're all doing it. And so I can't imagine a better time to be a horror fan than right now. So, and I love watching movies in a cinema. We're surrounded by other people. And so I'm glad cinema survived. I'm glad it's thriving. I'm glad that we're seeing all of these great a new generation of not only filmmakers, but a new generation of fans. The number of, like, articles we saw the last 3 years of movies are dead, it's over, streaming. And this next generation comes and, like, no, it's not dead. Like, no. We're Gen Z, we love it. Like, we want to go to a movie theater. Like, we've had these phones in our pockets since we were born. We don't want that anymore. We want to sit in a room with strangers and have a great time. And so, it's so comforting and reassuring to me that cinema is alive, and not only alive, but just kicking ass. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah, during COVID, I had so many people saying the movie theater wasn't going to survive. And I'm like, yes, it will. Yeah. There is something about the communal experience of watching a movie, whether it's horror, comedy, whatever, that you can't have in a living room. I don't care how spectacular your setup is. So
we started out telling these stories around campfires, and that's what the movie theater is. And that's not going to change. That's not... Yeah. It's never going away. We have to experience that. And if it goes away, then we're lost, right? That sense of, telling another person a great story that's what makes us human.
Right. Can I make a suggestion for a movie to watch? I don't know if you've seen it. Undertone.
Yes, I love Undertone.
Good.
As podcasters, I bet you do love Undertone.
I loved it. I don't think they've seen it yet, but I did enjoy it. Oh, yeah, you did watch it, BJ. I forgot. Yeah, I loved it. It was great.
As a female podcaster, I've been like,
yep,
I'll get there. I will.
Yeah. It's a great one. And that's a wonderful example of what a creative idea with very little money can do if you're super smart. Coming from a really meaningful place of experience and telling a story that hasn't been told before. It doesn't take a lot of money. It just takes skill and passion. And that's a great movie that proves it.
Yeah. I just like to call that efficient budgeting.
For sure.
Efficient. It's an efficient budget. But I also want to extend a very, very special thank you to Melissa for connecting us. Very appreciative, and also very thankful for you coming on. Hope to have you on again, and hope to see more out of you creatively.
Yeah, you bet. I hope so too. Well, thank you guys for supporting us, and and letting us come on. And this has been awesome. I'm happy to come back anytime.
Thank you. All right, BJ Segura, do you want to bring us home?
I do. I do. Again, thank you, Leon, for coming on with us. This was so much fun. It every time we talk to other any horror fans, you just get excited. You get excited because they're excited, and then just like you said, when you go to the movie theater, when you go to a drive-in movie theater, you go to Red Rocks, you go to all these places where you can watch movies with people, even if they've seen it before, they light up. You see it in them, and that's the fun part. And one of our favorite things to do, and one of my favorite things to do, is watch movies with people for the first time that they've never seen those movies, because you can relive it through them, and it's so much fun. But for everybody here at 300 Podcast, I want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of 300 Podcast with your hosts. I'm BJ Segura.
I am Ashley Lunar Goddess.
I'm John Thomas.
If you have any questions, comments, or episode suggestions, please feel free to email us at 300podcast@gmail.com. If you haven't done so already, please like, follow, and subscribe to all our social media. You don't want to miss our amazing guests like Leon Kelly here.
Also, don't forget to check out 300podcast.com, where you'll find all of our past and current season episodes, as well as guest information and all kinds of awesome merch.
Until next time.